My name's Diana Razalis, and I'm one of the co-editors of the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan. I'm also a research fellow at the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, based in Berlin, and working in residence with the Berlin Club Commission and with Vibe Lab. And we're delighted to be in conversation with some of our chapter leads today from a number of different cities around the world to talk a little bit about what we've been learning and what we've been sharing through the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan in these past 8 or so months. So first, I want to hand it over to Lutz Laxenring, who's going to talk a little bit about what this plan is and some of the big top-level findings. And then we'll open it up to Michael Fitchman, Alistair Turnham, Nandor Petrovics, and Lenny Schwendinger from across a number of different cities. And we'll get into conversation together. So Lutz, over to you.
Thank you, Diana. I'm starting to share my screen now. And I hope you see.
We see it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan is an amazing, unique project that was happening in these crazy times. And I will walk you through a bit through the steps that have been taken during this year and where we are finally now. And then I give over to this conversation to the chapter leads who contributed most of the work and all the back and insights that we collected from all over the world. So from lockdown to raise from the ashes, when we're talking about nighttime, this project is initiated by Mirik Milan and myself. We are both advocates for nighttime. Mirik was the night mayor of Amsterdam. I'm still in the position of the Club Commission Berlin spokesperson. And what we were trying to do is empowering stakeholders bottom up and to bridge the gap between decision makers in politics, in city governments, and in the creative communities. And why are we doing this? Because we think that the nighttime economy, nighttime culture, nighttime communities are so important and such an important part of our city societies. And we also believe that you have to have basically three parts of the nighttime economy in place to create a vibrancy, and that is you have to have a creative community in your city. You have to have enough creative space, and you have to have the right framework conditions. And especially when it comes to the framework conditions, we wanted to touch in the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan that I'm talking in a minute about. All the different areas that needs to be touched when we're talking about the nighttime economy. Is this a cross-sectional topic? We are talking about safety issue, we're talking about tourism, talking about laws and policies, city planning. So many things that needs to be discussed, and that makes it, of course, hard in cities to speak with the right people, with the right audience, because there are so many different people involved and responsible. And what we did in the recent years was we were advocating and creating a group of people that they call themselves nighttime advocates. Sometimes they're night mayor, sometimes director of Nightlife, sometimes commissions, night commissions, club commissions, whatever. We have more than 60 now all over the world. You see here on a map that is also published on nighttime.org/map. And you can see that this is a growing movement. This basically just started in the last 5 to 8 years, and it's growing and growing even more. And this was also something that we need to consider when we talk about what we actually should do when there is something like a lockdown. And in Berlin, it was actually on Friday, the 13th of March. And on this day, we decided to launch a project that is based on our local community, on the Club Commission infrastructure, which is a streaming platform. And we managed, because we had all the stakeholders in place, we had a lot of trust built up over the years, and we could 5 days later we could start with our first stream from a club, from the Watergate Club. And then after this we streamed basically every night from a different club, and till today we gave a stage to more than 2,000 artists, actually 2,100 artists, and this whole project grew to 95 cities all over the world and generated 1.5 million in donations. And it just shows that the idea of coming together in this crisis and working together and creating ideas and giving platforms to our community, I think it's a very important part. And that's also something that we then decided to do when we set up a WhatsApp group with all these nightmares and advocates and also scientists. And we decided on April the 5th to launch a blog around these topics that is touching everybody at the moment. And it's published on nighttime.org. And after having this blog, we also needed to think about how can we actually use this information that we gathered now to make really change in cities, because everything we want to change now need to be changed, not just for the next 2 or 3 months. It needs to be changed for the next 5, 10, 15 years, because there's so much to do, so many areas to talk about. And this is also a unique opportunity to put everything on the plate and discuss and make things different than before. And so on April 16th, we had our first meeting, and it was a small group of people, and some of them you already also find in this call. And we decided to kick off with a global nighttime recovery plan, which was very ambitious because we had a network, but we also just were in the beginning of of course, big crisis that is related to so many also personal difficult times all over the world, and we really need to reach out to everybody and try to involve them. So questions that we were raising was how can we use open air nightlife in this crisis? So that was also our first chapter that we were talking about, but also how can we make sure that there's also financial support for independent businesses and individuals? How is the licensing and regulation system being in place, and what are best practices and good practices around the world that other cities can learn from? And the idea or the process of the plan is very simple. We first brought people together, then we decided on what topics we want to touch on. We tried to organize these contents in different chapters, and we had to find people who have that much knowledge and overview on these topics to lead a chapter and to bring this knowledge to a digital paper. And by publishing it, we then have something that we can share with city officials, but also with nighttime enthusiasts and activists. So everybody is basically informed that this is a big approach that every city has to take in these times, and to share this knowledge all around the world. Until this day, we published already 3 chapters. The first chapter was focusing on, as I mentioned, outdoor space and sound. The second chapter was then focusing on indoor space. How can we use the space flexible and create new clubbing experiences? And finally, and this is also something we dive deeper today, is the topic about innovating for 24-hour cities. And there is more to come. So after the first 3 chapters, there are 4 more to come. You can find all these information, what are the next upcoming chapters, and also the release dates we are happy to share with you. So just sign up on our blog on nighttime.org, download all these chapters there for free. And please get in touch with us if you have some ideas that you want to share. And so this is a timeline that we created. It's almost up to date. So we continue our work until the end of the year, and then early next year we want then to release the last chapters. So we have everything in place when cities also try to make these big decisions maybe early next year. Thank you very much. And now I hand over to Diana to introduce the panel.
Perfect. Let's thank you. I appreciate that for that overview. And I want to introduce first Michael Fitchman and hear a little bit about his thoughts as in such an interdisciplinary work. What for you is the value of looking at all of these pieces together? Because we have urban design, we have music industry, we're looking at policy, we're looking at a number of different approaches. From your expertise, why do that?
Sure. First off, it's really nice to be here speaking with all of you. Hello from Philadelphia. I think on some level, maybe my story in coming here is similar to many other folks, where I have a background in the music industry, and I'm also interested in cities and communities. And I work as a city planner and professional consultant. And in my work going back a number of years with Lutz and Mirek, one thing that we found is that, and in our professional lives, advocating in our own communities, is that you need to be a little bit of a translator between different communities, and able to take things that matter to people in the scene, say, and go to somebody who sits in City Hall and present the issues that matter to you in a format that they can understand, and in a type of language that they think is valid. And one thing that we've seen in our work with nightlife industries around the world is that nightlife is treated very differently than many other parts of the economy, or nighttime is treated differently than the daytime, but many of the issues are the same, and that they just happen to intersect in this area where we're interested. So if you think about how all the things that go into a club night or a district functioning at a given time, how do people get to where they're going? How are they kept safe? How are those spaces licensed? How are the workers treated? How are the streets designed? How are they lit? Who is included and who is excluded from participating? Which communities are given value? Which communities are pushed to the side? Who is doing things in a legal or an illegal way? And how do you govern this whole system? And so I think from the approach of those at the city level, where people are making decisions that affect our industry, we thought that we had to take an approach where we were not leaving any stone unturned, and trying to think about the holistic nature of the city, of which nighttime and nightlife is just a part, but it's a part that's very centrally important to all of us.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to think right now about this current moment, and then do a little bit of looking back and looking forward both. And for that current moment exactly, I'm echoing a little bit. Is that okay? I want to introduce Ali and Lenny. I'll have you both introduce yourselves, and to talk a little bit about the key questions that your chapter 3, which just came out this month, was seeking to answer, and where your expertises kind of fit into this puzzle.
Shall I go first?
Perfect.
Hi, thanks, Anna. So I'm Ali Turnham. I'm the founder of Make Associates. We are a nighttime city planning consultancy specialists, and we've created nighttime economy strategies, nighttime economic studies, various lots of planning for nighttime cities. And we've been involved in it for about 30 years, or I have, since the mid-90s, when I also had an academic and music background, a bit like Michael just said there. And I think we probably come at it from fairly similar angles. So we were asked to, and I'll let Lenny introduce herself shortly, maybe then we can come back and have a little bit of a discussion about what our chapter was about, as you asked for, Diana. But our chapter was very much about how do we create innovation for 24-hour cities. We're not suggesting for a minute that every city should be 24 hours everywhere all of the time, although in reality they of course are. It's more about how can we, in a time of pandemic, use flexibility in terms of regulations, planning, in terms of data, in terms of advocacy, to create a new opportunity for cities to recover out of this pandemic and to seize the opportunities that a very dark cloud has brought us, and a pathway out of it by being more innovative, more creative, and trying to think fresh about how we can communicate the value and opportunities of cities at night, not just nightlife, but the city as a whole. So that's a little intro for me, and I'll hand over to Lenny. She can give you a bit more, and then maybe we can come back and have a little bit of a tete-a-tete.
Thank you very much, Ali, and everyone. It's been an absolute joy working on this project with you. And I come a little bit out of stage right, shall we say. I do have a bit of a music background, lighting, rock and roll, and painting glass slides for Ozzy Osbourne, believe it or not, floating candles in Gothic haunted houses, way back when, for scenic backgrounds. But I'm here because of feet on the ground, people, social relationships in cities after dark. However many hours we spend really concentrating on the club goer and the night shift worker, the mom with the pram trying to get around the drunks, feeling unsafe, and the lady coming back from a cleaning job trying to get to the freaking bus stop. So, you know, expanding our audience, our purview to include all of the night creatures and night people, and then creating luminous legibility or guidance through light and a feeling of confidence through light. And after all, our clubs and our music venues and our theatrical venues exist within a context. And that is the urban city context. So let's improve the context at night. That's what I'm all about.
Fantastic. And I would love to bring into the conversation as well Nandor, who's the chapter lead of one of our upcoming chapters about nighttime governance.
Yeah, hello. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitations. I'm Nandor Petrovic, currently working as a doctoral candidate at the Doctoral School of International Relations and Political Science at the Corvinus University of Budapest. And I'm also teaching public policy and management master students at the university. My research and teaching activity is, on one hand, it is about public policy analysis and policy design. But on the other hand, my doctoral research project focuses on governance networks in nighttime economies, mainly in European cities, but my area of interest also covers other questions of network governance. For example, I plan to do the empirical survey for my doctoral thesis in the next semester. So hopefully the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan is not the last project in which we can meet each other. So our chapter, which I was echoing for a minute, sorry. But the others also. Okay, so our chapter is about building nocturnal governance capacity for night mayors and other nighttime governance organizations. The chapters were presented so far are mainly about different practical problems like managing open space or public space, or managing venues, or managing the city as a whole. Our chapter is a little bit overarching. So in terms of, we are seeking answer to the question how to manage the management. It sounds a little bit theoretical, so if you let me that, I would like to go into the details a little bit. In the chapter, when we say capacity, in some meaning, we understand capacity as an ability to manage nighttime economies. We would like to provide maybe not solutions, because solutions are different in terms of they should be transferred. But we try to give some recommendations how to get or how to build these capacities. Of course, we all know the trouble and the misery in what we are, but at the same time, there is a high demand from the people for having social activities, which is difficult to restrict completely. Furthermore, people may already realize the value of social activities. Consequently, measures should be balanced between two controversial requirements: the need for social activities and the risks of social activities, and the innovation. So this whole GNRP is a little bit about innovation. The innovation is forced by these controversial conditions. it is clear that the businesses in this sector, they do not have enough resources to get through the long crisis. Maybe we can see the beginning of the end of the pandemic, but who knows? So we can have only speculations. Consequently, we can say that public funds and support from the local and national government and cooperation between public institutions has a key importance. And at the same time, solidarity and cooperation between stakeholders in nighttime economy is more needed than ever. It is more important than it was ever. So who are the stakeholders? Of course, we all know them: national government, local government, public service and law enforcement organizations, tourism and economic development agencies, chambers of commerce, venues, entrepreneurs, night shift workers, local residents, and many more stakeholders. These stakeholders are dependent on each other, and it is a key message of the chapter. Why are they dependent on each other? First, because they are sharing similar problems. This is another key message. In a sense that the problems they are facing with are interconnected. They are sharing the same space, the same time, where one problem can result in another problem, back and forth. And the second point, and it is also a key message of the chapter, that they are also sharing the resources which are needed to deal with the problems. And these resources are distributed among the actors. What are these resources? Information, data, professional knowledge, financial resources, non-financial resources, or regulative power. We were talking about regulation, legal authority to implement and to enforce regulations, social capital, political support, and so on. And the third message of the chapter would be that, and it is, I think, a very important role, or maybe the most important role of night mayors and other nighttime governance institutions, that they can and they should connect these actors and resources into a network. In other words, having opportunity and giving an incentive to the actors to combine their individual resources, their individual capacities into network level capacities. And this is the third key message of the chapter. So in more precise, capacity in one sense is the ability to use these resources in a cooperative way, let's say in a network, for having a sustainable nighttime economy. So what does the question, how to manage the management, mean? It means how to build cooperation, how to build alliances, how to build networks to manage different problems and different issues in the nighttime economies. Of course, what Michael said, translation is a very important, the key point. And it is also very important that who is participating as who is excluded. So these are the questions that our chapter called Building Nocturnal Governance Capacity for Night Mayors would be talk about. And I'm very happy to be part of this project. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Nandor, and thank you all. So I know that we have a big field right now that we're thinking about the spatial elements of nighttime, the policy elements of nighttime, and the people as well. And I think it's important to ground some of that stuff in what we with GNRP call not necessarily best practice, but practice. That right now this is a moment of innovation, of trying new things out, and that the most important thing that we can do, as Nandor is saying, is to connect and network and be able to share what's working well in cities, what is challenging, and hopefully be able to share common knowledge and various approaches so that we can be building back on one another's knowledge and build back better. So I want to invite Lutz to highlight some of the ideas from the first chapter about open air. Berlin Club Commission and Berlin in general has a real ongoing discussion about open air spaces and how to make those more available to cultural uses. So I know that we probably have people from both halves of the globe here, some of whom are in warmer summer mode and some of whom are gearing back up for next summer. But I'd love to invite you to talk a little bit about a couple of the best practices in Berlin about how open airspace was maximized and how other cities might get that kind of discourse going too.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch into that topic. Yeah, so the idea of having spontaneous events on public space is something that is very unusual, I would say, for some people, because I think everything needs to be regulated in our cities and everything has to be in place. And so there's only black and white. There is only legal and illegal. But by being close to the target group, by being in a conversation with people who are organizing these kind of spontaneous events, you see that they're not doing this for a purpose of making money with it. They're also not making this as a purpose of destroying or doing something illegal. They just use social media as tools to gather people together in a very quick way. Basically deciding today you're going to do a little event in a public park, and then tomorrow it's going to happen and 200 people are showing up. So this kind of happening is something that you can say, yeah, but it's not organized, it's not legal. But you can also say, maybe we appreciate this because we have public parks, and if we can make sure that if something is happening there is being treated well, so you don't leave any litter and you don't make any noise that people are feeling disturbed, why shouldn't it happen? As much as it doesn't bother anybody that people are doing picnics or playing soccer. And so we wanted to bring this conversation on the political level, because we saw that the administration only knew right or wrong, legal or illegal. So we had to discuss it on a political level. And this process already started about 5 years ago, and we made a lot of progress. We came into the conversation. Political leaders understood our issues, and they even put it into their programs, their political programs. So we as a club commission got a contract to develop this kind of project to make illegal events legal by setting up some rules. And there's one nice German word which is ultra long, and probably 99% of the listeners don't understand it, but it's a very long word. It's called Baumscheibenbepflanzungsrichtlinie, which is beautiful because it talks about how to create a guidance to plant around trees in city centers. Because what happens in Berlin all over the city, that people start to do urban gardening around their trees, the soil around trees. And this is actually a very nice thing, because people take over public space, create little gardens, little flower gardens around trees. That was something that was appreciated, but at the same time it was illegal, because you cannot just plant your urban garden anywhere you want. And the city tried to find a solution for this and set up a rule, like a set of rules that was created. And that was something that we also said, we need this kind of Baumscheibenbepflanzungsrichtlinie for our pop-up events and little spontaneous events happening in the city. We need a rule set. And today we are at a point that the districts actually in this crisis approached us and said, we have some space here. We have some nice little filet areas next to the river, which we don't really know what to do with it, because it's maybe too small to build something on it, but too big to be just left alone. So we collected about 65 of these little spots around the city in a study, and this helped us in the crisis to really use public space much more, because it is obviously less risky to do events outdoors. And so we could do quite some events in these spots. I think we did just around the COVID crisis. There were about 50 to 100 events happening on these little spots that were provided by the city. So I think from being illegalized, being caught by the police and publicly shamed in the media, to, hey, this is a very nice thing to have. Let's do this, but please do it without littering and noise. I think is a nice way that we went. I wouldn't say everything is perfect till now. There's still troubles, there's still conflicts, but I think we're much further than we thought we would be a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and Michael, I know you wanted to just jump in on that. The sense of creating flexible systems that can be responsive to the situations that we're in now, and knowing that 2021 is going to still be quite different than usual.
Yeah, that's right. I think that the first chapter of the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, which is about outdoor space, which we thought was a good place for us to provide our voice, because we come from a community that knows something about noise management and crowds in open areas and nuisance and things like this. And the second chapter, which is about what's going on inside of venues, both chapters point at the importance of having governments and neighborhoods and neighbors and communities and businesses be flexible, right? And the coronavirus crisis has provided this moment where all of a sudden rules can change really fast, and we're making these changes to keep ourselves safe, to try to keep businesses operating, to try to to add to what Lutz was saying, to legalize previously illegal things, because there is a recognized purpose and there's a harm reduction motivation there. And this at times like these, when things move really fast, I think it puts us in a position to take some things about our vision for the future, where there are all these conditions, situations, ideas that we never understood why they weren't accepted, and one of them being more permissive structures for nightlife. And all of a sudden, but it's relies on cities and governments being flexible, being willing to change what might have been very strict licensing or tax arrangements, and accept and try new things. What in urban planning we call this tactical urbanism, where you're trying a new idea at a sort of small scale, very inexpensively, and you may come to find that you'd rather have outdoor cafe seating than having 10 cars parking up an entire block of a beautiful, vibrant city. So now is a good time with the outdoor stuff, and also we should mention the indoor interventions that were talked about in chapter 2. What are some equitable models of organizing your business to try to make sure that your employees and the talent that's performing in your venues are treated with the respect and economic dignity that they deserve, and their safety is considered to be the most important thing in the operation of the business? What are the forms of entertainment that make sense with lower capacity? Does it make sense to, Berghain is an art gallery right now. How can cities allow for new uses for these spaces? How can you change your food licensing to create more revenue? Things of this nature. So our hope is through this project is mostly that people can exchange information from one city to another, where you see a good example from, say, Bogota in Colombia, and you think in Japan, that would be a wonderful idea. I'm going to approach my town council with that, with this idea, and maybe we can do this kind of entertainment in the street, and my business will survive. So that flexibility is very key, and the vision to find the ideas that we want to keep, and the ways that our industry and nighttime can be reformed in this period of rapid change, and then have that stuff stay with us afterwards, is also very key to the thinking.
Yeah, I appreciate like the taking this moment as a time to hopefully try out new things. And I do think we are seeing, unfortunately, a little bit of the opposite impulse, which is sort of falling back on potentially old ways of doing things. And I think one of the most pernicious ways that we're seeing that right now is sort of a return to curfews all around the world. And so I know that Ali and Lenny's chapter really got into thinking about 24-hour city planning. And so I want to invite each of you to comment on what kinds of other strategies can nightlife advocates, nightlife professionals bring to the table in their cities as an alternative to curfews to still make sure that we're using all of our hours of the night as an asset and not treating them as a liability.
Okay. I suppose, yeah, thanks, Diana. One of the things that I've advocated for a long time is having a proper strategy for the night in your city or town. Without that, you haven't been through the process of working out what your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities are about your city, and having that conversation that Lutz has mentioned, that Nando's mentioned, and that is the heart of our chapter. So for me, having a nighttime strategy for your city is essential. And that can be one that has a recovery aspect out of COVID and pandemic, because that's an opportunity to get a discussion going, which obviously other speakers have talked about, and in formulating how we're going to get out of that. And how we have short-term, medium and long-term actions that we identify, things that are immediately about saving businesses, about seizing opportunities, about mitigating damage to economic success within our sector. And then the other ones are, which our chapter covers quite a bit of, is how do we build better cities at night that allow nightlife to flourish and nighttime activity to flourish in the future. I think it's worth mentioning that Lutz showed you earlier those 60 cities that now have a nighttime mayor or advocate. So there's 60 cities, right? And at the start of the year, I think it was probably, sort of 45. It's a growing movement, as Lutz says. However, there are, we worked out a while ago, at least 2,000 cities in the world that would really benefit from having nighttime advocates and nighttime mayors. So for me, that's got a long way to go, and that's the first step in terms of getting a voice that can bring everyone together to advocate for a strategic approach to nighttime nightlife. I think one of the other things that our chapter is divided into 3 sections. So one is about innovation, flexibility in terms of regulation, responsiveness there, licensing, planning, regulations, can go into that a bit more. Then we have movement. So how do people get around towns and cities at night? And this is a fundamentally overlooked part of it. So if I'm involved in nightlife, I need my workers, my patrons, to be able to get around safely, to get to and from nightlife districts or areas where nightlife is happening. And that needs to be joined safe. And then the third area, many on in a minute, is around lighting. Although obviously they're all interlinked in the sense that you can't have effective transport and transit and movement without effective lighting in the right places. So I think probably giving people who are here a best case scenario at the moment is Sydney in Australia. We use this as an example in our chapter, but I think it has a lot of applicability beyond just our chapter, in the sense that Sydney, as many people will know, was sort of a crucible for how to destroy your city at night through the lockout laws, which were a state government rather than a city government intervention from 2015 onwards, after a small number of incidents of alcohol-related violence. And that city's nightlife was decimated in certain areas. And that was a real wake-up call, which you can use, which you can generalize, I think, now for the rest of the world, is that we're all going through very similar processes that they inflicted upon themselves back then. And out of that has come a much better dialogue between state government, city government and the mayor, through nightlife advocates, businesses and residents, and the health sector, who are worried about the kind of implications of nightlife on health and public health. And out of that has come 2 plans, one at a city level, which is part of their general COVID city recovery plan, and one of which is at New South Wales state government recovery level. And within that, there's some real innovation. So extending opening hours of retail to support nightlife, extending hours of restaurants, not just in the city centre, but in neighbourhoods, so that you've got a cohesive approach, not just focused on existing nightlife areas, but where do we want to grow different types of evening and nightlife, not just in the city centre? And then linking up with that around tourism destination marketing. So how can we then bring people back? Because we know, as said, and Nandal echoed, that at the heart of cities, without nightlife, they're really boring, right? So we need to get them back. And part of the approach in Sydney and New South Wales is to say, we recognise now it's really important to have this as part of our cultural, social makeup, not just as an economic driver. We've done some great work on measuring the economic value of that sector to them, but also that should be underpinning who they are, their cultural identity on a city scale and a global scale. So one of the things that we tackle in the chapter is how do you move people around safely? And in some ways, Sydney's been quite backward in that way. They'd admit that themselves. They're a very dispersed, diffuse city. So their challenge is to get a more joined up approach to transit at night that gets everybody around in a safe way. They've been very good on light. You've probably seen some of the amazing light that they've been doing around Sydney Opera House, lighting that up, and some of their lighting interventions we've picked up over the years. But lighting is also features large in that recovery strategy for the night in Sydney. So I'd pinpoint everyone to that example, and you can find it pretty easy on the web and in our chapter. But on that note of lighting, I thought I'd hand over to Lenny. Lenny.
A very deft transition. Thank you. I've been asked to talk a little bit about this interesting intersection of lighting and people, that is engagement. And it was interesting. I was at night camp, which Vibe Lab had, also Michael was involved in Manhattan some years ago. And I was in a group that wanted to discuss community outreach and their small businesses. And I thought it was super interesting. I learned a lot. And what I understood is that a lot of small venue owners don't really have community outreach as far as local, as we were saying, contextual urban fabric, the people in your neighborhood, down yet. The education around, like, okay, we can put some leaflets up and flyers, we're opening. It may be a little noisy. Well, there's a lot more you can do to get people on your side and what we call buy-in. And I want to talk about light as an enabler of community interaction and engagement and getting people on your side, even during the COVID pandemic, and as a creative act. So you see the lights behind me, and you all know what fairy lights and twinkle lights are, which those are not, by the way, they're bigger. But getting twinkle lights and working with people on light festivals that are easy to do it yourself, lighting technical urbanism or tactical lighting, flexible, creating environments of light, braided fairy lights, formed fairy lights, portals, parades. A lot of things are battery operated now. You know, ways to bring people onto your side for now and for later. One of the night camp venues suggested that they were, as Michael's talking about different models, they were having like children's classes on off nights, or they were having like office hours for people to work away from home on off days, or the hours they weren't really open as a venue. And I just thought these are really interesting and to be pointed to as a benefit to the neighborhood than, you know, what's often we hear about the worst case, which is the noise, the drunks, the litter, as has been mentioned. Instead, to be pointed to as, oh yeah, that club, they've got this great program for kids. Or, oh, that club, have you ever seen that crazy wild light sculpture outside of there? And so I'm just trying to point out that Sydney, for example, has really professional, fantastic light festivals, as does Amsterdam, as does the several cities in the UK and other places. But there are ways you can do small scale citizen engagement projects that help to define the spatial environment as well as get people involved.
Lenny, I really appreciate that. And I want to lift that up as we think about 24-hour use of cities, about thinking about not only how we as nightlife advocates and practitioners can activate spaces that aren't usually used for nightlife, but also think about how our nightlife spaces can be used for other uses, make it perhaps more legible or more of a mainstay in the community for people who don't necessarily often think of themselves as going out at night. I think that's a really great thought, and very much in the spirit of this innovation for us to be trying out at moments like this. But I want to come back from the way Ali was talking about Sydney. Just there's a victory that I think people often overlook of just getting nightlife to the table and getting nightlife to be a piece of the puzzle that's talked about in recovery plans, that's talked about in urban planning, because I do think that's something that's easy to be overlooked or not traditionally considered in part of the urban planning process. And so I want to invite in Nandor to think a little bit about, for cities who are just beginning this nighttime advocacy process, or practitioners that want to do a better job building these relationships with policymakers, what is one important first step and what's a mistake to avoid? Oh, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, so as I told you before, that I really like this formulation of the question that what should be avoided, because sometimes it is easier to say what not to do than finding out what to do. So of course, we collected a lot of information from the case studies. I don't want to give a complete evaluation of the cases because we did not have the chance to discuss them with the other members of the team, but I can say the following. Of course, in the chapter, we will say something about what to do, or at least how did the others do in a successful way. We already heard an example of Sydney, and I will give some other examples as well. So we will have good examples which are inspirational in a sense that they are good practices indeed, and also in a sense that you can point out that, look, they were able to do something, they were able to build a cooperation, and now it is better for them. Okay, we can do it as well. It is very important because it gives you some kind of spiritual power. It is not very scientific, but it is very important that to make the sense that we are in the same trouble. It is a very interesting situation, a sad but very interesting situation, that everybody is in the same sharing the same problems. So it is also a very good way that, for example, if you are talking to a governmental or a city official, that because they need the information, and all the night mayors have this specific knowledge which they can provide for the decision makers. So let's turn to the question what not to do. If I want to summarize in one key pitfall to avoid, then I can say that the one thing which absolutely should be avoided is disintegration. So the first step would be that avoid the disintegration if you already have a nighttime management organization or a night or any other organization which is dealing with the nighttime economy. If you don't have, then follow the good examples and trust in yourself and trust in your city officials and trust in your decision makers that, okay, you can show that there are other cities that they were able to do something, and it can, give you the spiritual power that I was talking about. So all the successful examples, in all the successful examples, we can say that night mayors were connecting people, connecting institutions, connecting actors and capacities. As I said, innovation is forced by the current conditions of the situation in what we are. And yes, these are innovations indeed. Innovations of empowerment, innovations of capacity building, and innovations of the management of the nighttime economy. So crisis results in fast changes. Maybe Michael told this already. But at the same time, crisis always opens opportunities to have new solutions and to have a new opportunity. If I may say that, we call it window of opportunity in public policy. So the window of opportunity, where problems, solutions, and political will political will to change situations takes place in the same time and opens the opportunity for do something different. Okay, curfews and other measures are part of political debate. It is always a political decision. We must understand this. Governments tend to show power in crisis because people expect this from governments. A successful dealing with the crisis can improve political support for governments, so they also take the opportunity to gain some support from the people. But it is important to be ready with the solutions, or at least be ready with some recommendations for the decision makers how to deal with the problems. So if the window of opportunity opens, we can take the chance. And I think this is one thing that this global nighttime recovery plan is about. To have, okay, not instant, not ready solutions, but at least to show some opportunities, some ways, some way of thinking, some way how can we give recommendations for decision makers. So if we see the successful examples in addition to Sydney, for example, in Montreal, in Canada, they were able to build capacity through establishing a night council, a broader cooperation. It is an innovation. In Helsinki, they were able to build capacity through establishing a nightmare position. It is also an innovation. In Tokyo, they were able to build capacity through reaching out to the government officials. They made the governmental officials to understand the situation. This is kind of similar that Lutz was talking about in connection with Berlin. In Vilnius, they were also able to build capacity through reaching out to stakeholders in the field. So they are all integration. This is why I was talking about integration and disintegration. Integration is, of course, not in a sense of institutional integration, not necessarily an institutional integration, but a cooperation between stakeholders, a network between stakeholders. Of course, a network can be also an institution, but it is some kind of, loose something. But there are also unfortunate examples. For example, in Budapest, the nightmare organization is not really functioning. It is also a lesson to learn why it happened. In Seattle, the position of the nightmare has been abolished due to financial austerity. So we can also include in these, I wouldn't say bad examples, but some kind of not so happy stories. So summarizing, we all see the difficulties. Nightmares may lose their allies, their partners, volunteers, organizers who are really the soul of the movement. They may lose also financial resources or governmental support. But this is the most important I can say in this situation, that they have to build, or if they have to keep up their networks. They have to keep up their networks. They have to keep their networks active, because this is the basis of their power, the most important and sometimes the only basis of their power, their network.
Great. So I want to open this up to everybody. I'll stop directing questions just to individuals, but I would love to invite folks to share one model or one idea from another city that's giving them hope or inspiration right now. And Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot, though, if I may, because one of the models that's giving me inspiration is the scenario planning work that you were trying out earlier this year. I think it's a really smart and flexible way to think about being resilient in the coming year. And I'd love if you can share a couple thoughts about that, and then we open it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's nice of you to say. Yeah, so for scenario planning is a in the urban planning field, or also in business for, this actually comes from modern business consulting, that discipline. Scenario planning is essentially a storytelling exercise where you're imagining different futures and thinking about how you'll react to them. And that's a concept that we've, through this whole process with the GNRP, we've tried to stress, because normally when you're trying to predict the future to create your budget for next quarter, or think about what acts you're going to book next year, you have some path depending on the recent past that you project into the future. That goes out the window. We don't know what the world is going to be like next month. We don't know what the world is going to be like in 3 months, even less in a year. So the best we can do is try to imagine different futures and think about how we'll react. So my colleagues Gia Yuan and Andre Nasejas worked with me and several US nighttime economy officers to do a scenario planning workshop, where we tried to, and this is something that you can do for your business, this is something you can do for your local district or your city. And we just thought, okay, let's say the virus we did this in the summer, let's say the virus gets really bad in the winter, and maybe there's a lockdown, maybe there's not enough political will to have another lockdown. What level of business closure do you estimate will happen? How do you prevent that from happening? If it does happen, what is going to happen to all this commercial space? And we started thinking through what are the aggressive real estate companies in a given city that are going to take up this space and excuse me, destroy the center of gay nightlife in a certain city, because it's in a valuable commercial corridor, and having a nightclub or a music venue or a bar that is a really special and important part of a certain community's life, that doesn't really matter to these real estate interests. What is the government going to do to intervene? And that's something you could do just as well for your business and your scene, because there's no real way to understand what will happen if there's rapid testing that's very accurate and available. What will happen if a vaccine is available in March versus a vaccine isn't generally applied until the end of the summer, and there's a whole festival season that's lost. So this type of tool is one of the best ways that we can try to at least make somewhat informed decisions when there's so little that we know about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, so I want to also make sure we open this up to the audience. If folks have questions they want to share in the chat, they're welcome to do so, and we'll work them into the conversation. But in the meantime, I want to just invite anybody to come in, models that are exciting to you right now, that are giving you hope, that you hope catch on from other cities that you're watching.
Okay, so we're based in London, and it's not just because we're in London. I'm going to give London as an example because it becomes pretty tiresome, doesn't it, when it's just everything's New York, London, Sydney, Paris, whatever, right? So there's like thousands and thousands of other cities around the world, but it's the one that I know best. So I'm going to give you an example of what the mayor's doing there. As people may know, there's a night czar there who's been employed for the last 3 years. There's a nighttime commission there that's made some recommendations, and of course many of those are now in train, although due to pandemic some of them have been put on hold. But earlier this year the mayor, through the Greater London Authority, commissioned 4 pieces of work, and these are off the back of recommendations from the Nighttime Commission, and some of them are unique, some of them are things that have been done elsewhere. But I think they're kind of interesting, and I think they're things that could be applied in other cities or could be learnt from or critiqued. So I'll go through them very briefly. The first one was a piece of work that looked at some of the restrictive nightlife regulation within London. It's a national legislation, but how it applied in London, and what were the impacts on nightlife, on business, on the economics of nightlife. So that's one piece, and these are all coming out. Well, they were due out a few months ago, but of course, due to the pandemic, things have been put on hold, but they're out imminently. People can contact me and I can give them more information about them. The second piece that he's commissioned is a toolkit for later opening. So costs and benefits of later opening London. That's the one we're involved in. So that's looking at not just nightlife, but shops, theatre, repurposing public spaces, repurposing other spaces, civic buildings for later opening, and making more interesting use of those. So there's a piece there about how to assess how you could open your borough, and bear in mind London's made up of 32 boroughs, how you can make a city work better locally and as a collective whole for everybody, residents, business, and visitors as well. The third piece is a guidance document for every borough, all those 32 boroughs, because the mayor wants to see every borough have a late night strategy, as well as his own overview strategy of London. So there's guidance there that's being drafted about how to create a strategy for every individual borough. And there's a benefit there, because those of us who are in it, and Lenny and I often have these conversations, and other authors here, we just all assume this stuff is like second nature to how you would run a city better at night. But in reality, sort of as Lutz and Michael have touched on earlier, in reality, we need to help people walk before they can run. And we're often running with our discussions, our debates, but we need to hold people's hands through it. And so the third piece that he's commissioned is this guidance to support individual boroughs to create their own strategy. And the fourth one, and I think this is really interesting, and in some ways it's a nerdy data science thing, so it sounds really boring and turns people off, but it's a nighttime data observatory. And of course, Lutz has been involved with the Vibe Lab work on his mapping of cultural spaces and nightlife spaces around the world. But this observatory that the mayor is working on is an idea to have a repository of all the relevant data to measuring the city at night. So that's transit data, it's lighting data, it's economic data, it's visitor data, it's business data, it's cultural space data, etc., etc., etc. So that supports those individual boroughs so they can go and find the data that underpin their strategy, but it also allows us to measure performance of the city at night. And those are four things that I think will have real benefit over the next 5 years in London. So there you go. That's I've got one more little one, and this is a completely different thing. I mean, many people will follow Paris and Mayor Anne Hidalgo, the incredible slash, what should I say, controversial sometimes mayor of Paris. She's come up with this, she's adopted this idea from urbanists of the 15-minute city, that everyone should be able to get everything they need within 15 minutes of where they live. Those of us who are urbanists have been thinking about this for a long time, but it's nice to see a politician of that high profile picking up that idea. Controversial, there's difficult things about delivering it, but in principle, it's a good idea, I think. One of the things I really like about it, and Lenny might touch on this, is with her work on first mile, last mile of transport and movement and getting people home, and this blows my mind that it's taken so long, is she's instructed that buses should be able at night to drop people off, not just at bus stops, but near their home, so they can walk much more quickly and safely to their front door. How long has it taken for us to get someone to think in that kind of way? So that's a little nutshell of how you can do practical things to make the night safer and people feel more welcome.
I can respond just really quickly before I have to run and get a COVID test on time. About first mile, last mile, it might be something our viewers and attendees might not know about, as well as 15-minute city. So the idea actually is, if we think transit is a really great idea, and we do, because it reduces air pollution, use of cars, etc., how do people get to and from transit nodes, subways, buses, trams? How do they get there at night? Of course, we always have our night glasses on, our night seeing glasses. How do we get from work to transit, transit to home, or the other way around? And that has something to do with this built environment on the surface, which is pavement, sidewalks, and streets, and how we get to and from them. And what I want to just leave you with is this idea of respite, a place to go while you're walking or bicycling to transit, work, or home. I've done many envisioning workshops with people, and often it comes up, we'd like a place to stop. We'd like a place to rest. We'd like a place to meet our friends. And that is free, a free place. You know, it could be a bus shelter. It could be a new kind of bus shelter where you could stop. Of course, it needs to feel safe. So do we need some kind of security depending on the neighborhoods? You know, do we need eyes on the street, some kind of a council walk throughout the night? But what I've learned, and I'm using the word respite, and I hope you'll use it next week yourself and find a time to say so. Something illuminated, attractive, a place to wait, to rest before moving on to the subway stop, the tram stop, the bus stop, where you can feel safe at night. And with that, I have to go now.
Thank you, Lenny. I really appreciate that you were able to join. Thanks for being with us.
I'm hoping that one idea that takes root after this is all over, and one thing that I feel pretty good about coming to the surface is the general recognition by people in society that nightlife has a lot of cultural value, and it's something that we all miss. We miss each other. We miss the socializing. We miss the music. We miss the places and the experiences. And I think a lot of societies around the world are starting to see the level of responsibility that nightlife operators have accepted for what it means to gather people together, and people accept that there are financial prices to pay to keep people healthy. I think that's a positive political outcome for the nightlife industries, which I think have always had a complicated relationship with governments. And my hope is, and this is something I think everybody who's watching this hopes, is that governments and our societies in general respond to the crisis that nightlife venues and workers are going through, and begin to actually see the people who work in these industries for who they are, and not just think of them as being oftentimes marginal people who park automobiles or work at the door of a nightclub, or that there's a whole universe of people that are connected to the nighttime economy, and they're hurting financially, and society should reward them for the sacrifices that they're making to keep everybody safe by supporting them. And I would add that should extend to a recognition of what I think is an epidemic beyond COVID, which is the mental health crises in nightlife industries that I think have been magnified by the way that everybody has been dislocated and is experiencing economic problems. And I think that's one thing society can do to support us. And I think we should take care of our own communities and try to recognize some of these challenges that people face even when there's no pandemic.
Yeah, I think that something that is so particular to our scene and this work is that it is both really local and really international. And also we move really fluidly between these formal systems of how cities work and business, and really informally too. And one of the things I've felt is really valuable is that we use informal tools. Like I've seen the power in the last months of just a WhatsApp thread and its ability to connect people. And so I think that's something we can keep looking towards in addressing these really severe and really sort of worrisome possibilities over the coming months to think about all the tools that we have at our disposal and what we uniquely as nighttime practitioners and artists and advocates have available to us that's sort of different in this industry than in others. Allie, it looks like you want to come in here. Oh, no, shaking your head. We've just got a few last minutes here, so I want to invite Nandor into the conversation and then thinking about looking forward with the GNRP and continuing this conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me have some final points. I was thinking about whether I can pick one inspirational case, but I cannot because as a policy expert, I can say that all the examples are different. This is why I said that we cannot give instant solutions, just examples which are maybe good for one specific situation, maybe not. Especially the administrative culture in which the governmental organizations are operating. These cultures are very different in different countries. Also, the social culture in which the whole policymaking process is nested is very different. So I would say something else. The most inspirational story for me at this moment is this whole nighttime recovery plan itself. It is a historical thing, I think. As I said several times, networking is important, but at the moment, one of the biggest, or maybe the biggest network related to nighttime economy is the network which emerged around the GNRP project. And it is also a powerful thing. This is something that all the nighttime advocates and nightmares can point out that show that, look, there is a broad cooperation between practitioners, academic researchers, and several other people from many countries. And it also shows the importance, we were talking about importance. It also shows the importance of the issues of nighttime economy. This is one more message.
Beautiful, thank you. That's a great
Thank
thought.
you, and goodbye. Sorry for leaving you.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, goodbye.
So I know we're just coming to the end here, and I want to also highlight that the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, it's an ambitious mandate just in the name, that to be truly global, we're still working to expand our networks and making sure that we're learning from folks in every city on every continent that we can, that our network has its outer bounds right now, and that's something we're really working to grow. And so if your city is not represented yet on the map on nighttime.org/map, if you're not yet hooked into this network, we would love to change that and to hear from you and to find ways to create support and to create exchange between all these different cities so that we can all be solving these issues and facing these challenges together. So to that end, I want to invite Lutz to offer a couple of thoughts about what to look for in the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan in the next months, the next chapters to come, and if folks want to tune in to future conversations, meet the authors' calls, how to get involved.
Yes, sure, I will do that. So thanks, Diana, and thanks for the panelists. Obviously, there was a long panel. I hope the viewers were staying until the end. I think just a brief thought about listening to the final words of everybody. I think what nighttime governments maybe makes it much more challenging for cities and also widely underestimated is that nighttime is really touching to the feeling of a city, to the authenticity of a city. So if you talk about the aesthetic dimension of nighttime, or the social dimension of nighttime, or the people make their money, the economical or financial dimension of nighttime, that is so important for so many people that they want to be involved. They don't want to just that the city sets up some plan and executes it. They want to be part of this process. And because it touches really their communities, their like local neighborhoods, their local environment, milieus, or communities. And I think that is so important if you're thinking about creating an advocacy role in your city, if you're thinking about making a long-term plan, that you cannot do this on your own. As a city, you have to build a plan, a strategy, as Ali said. And the strategy starts, for me, and the nighttime recovery plan can play an important role to get inspiration in the beginning. What are other cities are doing? How can I get inspired to learn from other cities that are maybe some years ahead in that what I'm planning here? The second part is have data. Ali also touched it. We have to have more information. We cannot make decisions based on our stomach feelings. The city is rapidly changing on different corners of city, so you have to have an overview and you have to know what is happening. So data is important. Number 3, you have to create awareness, because this topic is not just touching you, it's touching all different parts of the city and decision makers on different levels, administration, politics, national, local, or state level. So I think creating awareness about the main topics is a very important part that needs to be done before you introduce a night mayor or a club commission, because otherwise you created a role, and the role is maybe not really shaped in the right direction of the awareness and the challenges your city has. And so saying this, there is a lot of talking that needs to happen. There is a lot of communication, a lot of strategy planning. And I think the team that we put together here, more than 130 people, with you just saw this in the last 90 minutes, how much capacity there is, how much knowledge globally. And I think that is something that also all the cities and participants would like to share, because it's also something they do from their heart. And so I think that could be maybe also a good time for us to change a lot of things in cities at the moment, because that's what I learned in the crisis. People are more open to change and to think in different directions, maybe more than they used to do. And that is maybe the chance that we have, that people listen to us and create a plan that is maybe more useful than it would be in 2 or 3 years ago without a crisis. So looking to the future, we have upcoming topics. We're talking about how to finance individuals, artists, entrepreneurs, individuals in the industry. We talk about institutions, how can we fund institutions and create long-term plans in funding and supporting. And then we also, Nandor talked about it already, we talk about advocacy. So who are these people who are explainers, translators, gap bridgers, and then finally, that's Michael's topic. We are diving into data, how important information is, and also look into maybe the ethical questions around tracing apps and knowing if you're healthy or not healthy. So we're talking about safe space. We talk about people who maybe want to get loose and be anonymous at night, and now they want to have all this data. So that's also something that needs to be discussed all over the world. And so I'm looking forward to these upcoming chapters and further discussions that we're going to have.
Fantastic. So I want to thank once again all of our panelists, our chapter leads, and the contributors that make the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan possible. To thank the International Nightlife Congress and the INA for convening us. And if you want to know more about the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan, to sign up to download the chapters as they come out for free, and to take part in our Meet the Authors calls, which always happen after each chapter is released. You can do that at nighttime.org and find out more there, or if you want to take part in any way. So I'll hand this back over to Chelsea and just say a big thanks and to enjoy the rest of the festivities. Thanks again, everybody.